that they all may be one. This is the end of Jesus' farewell discourse with his disciples. It's as the Mount of Olives takes place, as Jesus is about to be betrayed, as Jesus is about to be deserted. The cross stands before him, the sinner's death, the death unpleasant, gruesome, for simply telling people to follow a new way, to follow a different way. And yet, as they stand before the unknown, as this time is coming, Jesus' prayer is that they all be one. I can't think of perhaps a more apt thing to preach in 2016, that they all may be one. As we live in a community that is fragmented, that is cast aside by sexual issues, that is cast aside by colour, by creed, as we are ripped aside as a community, and one is pitted against the other. The asylum seeker is pitted against those who have been here for a long time. The Indigenous people are pitched against another group of people. That is the community that we live here. I don't think it's much different wherever we go. For those of you who've been interested in listening to the American debate for who will be the leader of the free world, as they call it, I am disgusted at the level that people will sink to in order to be voted in. I know it's an extreme, but people are pitted against one another. Communities are pitted against one another. Black is pitched against white. Catholics against Protestants. Did we think that divided past? But that's what's happening in the States today. In my country, Muslim is pitched against Christian. Black is pitched against white. Where I come from, the story is no different. I don't know, it might be different from where you come from, but it seems that we have an ability to pull ourselves aside. Shortly we will be asked to vote either Labor, Liberal or Independent, and we will see terrible things said and done in the name of democracy, in the name of freedom. Quite frankly, my position is I don't want to vote. I don't want to encourage them. I don't want to sort of make them feel that they're better by sort of denigrating other people. As a country, can we be proud of things that are happening at Manus Island? Can we be proud of what's happening to asylum seekers? Can we be proud of what is happening to the Indigenous people? Can we be proud that we have the highest rates per capita of domestic violence in the Western world? My friends, we are heading towards an abyss. We really are. An abyss perhaps where there is going to be a very difficult job to put the brakes on and hold us back. I don't know, maybe it's nostalgia, but I grew up in a little bit gentler world, a little bit more compassionate world. Maybe 2 world wars had taught where I come from and here that perhaps we've got to learn to live better with one another. But are these questions being learnt? Are we actually acting on them here in 2016? It seems things have got tougher. I don't know about you, but I yearn for a softer, more gentler time. The church, where is the church? Well, the church is diminishing. The church is losing its voice. And perhaps rightly so, because half the time what the church said had very little meaning for the lives of people outside of the church. It was a morality that we just put upon people. Not always bad, I will grant you, but often wanting to once again divide people. So how do we stand today here in Springvale as we hear the words, that they may all be one? Well, firstly, do you want to be one? That's a big question. It's the question that underpins everything. By one, I do not mean just sort of giving off the party line, living by some tight dogma, but one in spirit, one in understanding God's love for a world, in proclaiming God's love for those around us, and proclaiming God's love when we see it acted out amongst each one of us. You know, it seems the church isn't too different from the world when you get us outside of the worship times. That we may be one is an important thing. Jesus knew that difficult times were coming as he went away for crucifixion, as he stood before Pilate. He knew that that was crunch time for the people who were following him at the time. His wish and his desire were that they were one. Did he get what he wished for? Well, it's an interesting question. Certainly, if you look at the first 300 years of the history of the church, it was filled with schism, filled with difference. There wasn't an ideal time where the church existed. It wasn't in AD 35 that the church was perfect and somehow it's denigrated. It wasn't in 1600s when the church was reformed and revitalised that the church was one. Certainly not. There isn't a golden time that was 1950s. For some of you it might have felt like that in the church, where we had the 300 people. But you see, we can be so nostalgic about these things and fail to understand that to be one is to be in the here and the now. Being one isn't just back in the past, but being one is today. The call on us to be one. The prayer that we might be one rather than splintered off and set on our own way. In many respects, like in political things, we are forced to choose our dogma so that we recognise ourselves by the differences. I grew up in a place near London which was full of people who were from Roman Catholic backgrounds. You know, the Roman Catholics. I have to say a few of my family are Roman Catholics. But we divided ourselves on that question. You know, you played footy for one side. You went to church for one side if you were Catholic or if you were Protestant. Now, that didn't happen here, did it? You know, maybe we've learned to tolerate them. But now we have other differences. You know, maybe our feminism causes us not to be one. Maybe our politics causes us not to be one. Maybe our race causes us not to be one. And let me say, I've experienced racism from all sides. I know what it's like to be put against because of my own family background, but I also know what it's like to put against someone else because of their race. Most of you here who've come from overseas have probably struggled to really go through that gap. We like to be polite, we like not to mention these things, but they exist here today, don't they? These divisions that take us apart. You know, are you a fundamentalist? Are you a progressive? Are you a conservative? Or are you a don't know? I don't know. But these things divide us even in the church still to this time. And yet Jesus says that they all may be one. As I say, it doesn't mean just all believing the same dogma, but it means a sense of committed to our oneness as people who follow the living God in this place. It means our oneness in seeing God in others and proclaiming that and allowing that to flourish and blossom. My friends, the church is on its way to the abyss as well as the world. We're going to hell in a handcart, and we're getting there pretty fast unless we do something about it. Why is the church diminishing? Why is the church numbers dropping in the uniting church? Well, I don't know. If I did, I'd probably be sitting in the synod office and be called the Grand Poobah. I'm not. But I know it's happening. And it's not about style, it's not about those things. Perhaps it's about our sense of oneness. Have we lost what it means to be one? To hold our diversity but in unity. A sense of belonging to this thing called church. You know, it's apologetic in this day and age to be someone who follows the Christian faith. You know, you have to be careful. You don't want to offend people. But our oneness is important. Oneness not to denigrate others, not to push ourselves up, but that we may be one in proclaiming the values that Jesus taught us. Loving one another, caring for those on the margins, binding up the brokenhearted, setting the prisoner free. This is the words of Jesus. Shortly after Jesus died, this fledgling thing called church took place, and we will celebrate that on Pentecost Sunday, where we rejoice in all the languages being heard and understood, where we rejoice in this multicultural nature of what happened on that first day. But very quickly it split. And as we see Paul's journey, we heard a bit about Paul today, but you know, the Judaizers, which were people, they weren't Jewish people. They were people who came in and said the only way to be Christian is to follow the Jewish laws. They had other people that were saying, well, you know, Jesus isn't this or he isn't that. There were thousands and different ideas of what Jesus was. And we can let those ideas run us. But yet again, we can say, in our oneness, there is something special. There is something godly in that sense of being one. There with one another, caring for one another and caring for a world that is hurting. Here we stand today. There are things that will divide us. There are opinions that will divide us. A group this big, you've got to think different from each piece of purpose and person. Sorry, I should say that again. You have to think different from other people. That's why we are individuals. I'm sure if we put questions out here, there would be vast disagreements in what we might think about life, the universe. I should say, put all the hands up those who are going to vote Liberal, put all the hands up those who are going to vote Labor, and you will see even in this church, there is diversity. But can there also be oneness? A oneness that supports one another and cares for one another. I am so pleased when I hear the stories of Trudy Singh yesterday, with supporting Green Gecko over there, very far from this place, in a very different environment. When we talk about helping the Benevolent Society, when we talk about things like the op shop, the men's shed, of what this church does. But our primary essence should be to follow and love God and to be one with one another. May our oneness endure in a world that is in difficulty. Amen.